Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm going to be sharing my time with the member for Brandon Souris this afternoon. And I'd like to offer a quick snapshot of what we're talking about today. And we have a very simple request, and that's that the former Attorney General be allowed to speak. And this isn't a nothing burger or a distraction as the Liberal government has claimed that it is, because we have a Veterans Minister who resigned after she lost confidence in this Prime Minister. We had the Treasury Board President resign after losing confidence in this Prime Minister. We had the Prime Minister's best friend and Principal Secretary resign. We had the Clerk of the Privy Council resign. We had 5 former Attorneys General call for an RCMP investigation. We had a former Liberal Attorney General say that if what is alleged to have happened while he was the Attorney General, he would have dialed 911. This is a criminal act, he says. We have the OECD, Anti-Bribery and Corruption Unit, watching very closely, concerned that Canada has breached its international obligations. And if all of that isn't enough, we had the Liberal-dominated Justice Committee slam the gavel and pull the curtains shut when we called for the former Attorney General to be able to rebut the testimony that was given, but to also be able to speak without her hands tied behind her back. The order in council that's been given does not grant sufficient latitude for her to speak about everything that we're talking about today. And we've heard the government say, well, other people have spoken about time that's not covered in the order in council and nothing's happened to them, but we know what's happened to Vice Admiral Mark Norman. And the former Attorney General has very able legal counsel, and she has obviously been well advised to tread very carefully and to operate only within the exact confines of that order in council. Having had the Justice Committee meeting adjourned last week, when a non-member was trotted in, the member for Glengarry Prescott Russell appeared, put his hand up, moved to adjourn, meeting adjourned. 24 minutes into the meeting, Madam Speaker. Unbelievable. While Canadians demand answers and the opposition seeks the truth, we have a government committed to a cover-up. It's no surprise, though, and it was reaffirmed for Canadians and members of the Justice Committee just yesterday when the meeting was the last meeting of the Justice Committee to study this very serious matter was closed to the media, closed to the public, and government members said there's nothing more to see here. And they said that because that's exactly what the Prime Minister's office told them to say. In this very place, we have asked for a public inquiry, and we've given all members of this House the opportunity to support that call for an independent and nonpartisan, non-PMO-controlled body to hold that public inquiry, where surely the former Attorney General would be allowed to speak, where surely we would get to the truth. But no, the government said no. The Liberal members in this House denied that request. We asked for the Prime Minister to appear at the Justice Committee. That request also voted down as part of the Liberal cover-up of this very, very serious matter. And a claim about jobs has been lobbed in response to our concerns over and over and over again by this government. And these 9,000 jobs that they allege to have been in jeopardy, not a shred of evidence, not a single line of text or a 140-character tweet, as the government often communicates their messages in, was offered as evidence of a risk to jobs. And in fact, evidence has been mounting that quite the opposite was true, that no jobs were at risk, that through covenants to the Quebec Pension Fund, in backordered work in the billions of dollars, and in the CEO's own words, the company had no jobs at risk. This was very much an effort by a liberal, connected company to receive one kind of justice, while the rest of us, the rest of Canadians, are able to receive a very different kind. And since the former Attorney General gave her shocking testimony, there's been constant claims of he said, she said. But in reality, he said, and what the Prime Minister will let her say is the case. And that's because the Prime Minister won't let her speak. The gag order is in place. So let's look at this. He said, she said. And it began with the clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Wernick, appearing before the Justice Committee to testify to his involvement and knowledge of the political interference. Now, according to Mr. Wernick's testimony, the Prime Minister and his department continued to pressure the former Attorney General even after she told the Prime Minister she would not overrule the decision to allow SNC's case to proceed to trial, saying, quote, "The question that I think you're going to have to come to a view with, as well as will the Ethics Commissioner, is inappropriate pressure." He continued, "There's pressure to get it right on every decision, to approve, to not approve, to act, to not act. I'm quite sure the Minister felt pressure to get it right. Part of my conversation with her on December 19th was conveying context, that there were a lot of people worried about what would happen. The consequences, not for her, the consequences for the workers and the communities and the suppliers," end quote. Now, while acknowledging that there was pressure, in fact pressure, on the former Attorney General to overturn her final decision, we also now know that the clerk of the Privy Council also gave unregistered access to a lobbyist from SNC. The chair of the board was able to make a call directly to the clerk of the Privy Council on this issue. And it was only after a second appearance at the Justice Committee that we got that answer. So as you can see, Madam Speaker, sometimes these second appearances bear very, very interesting fruit. The account given by the former Attorney General, detailing many meetings, calls, electronic correspondence, included a cast of very interesting players from the government, including the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, the Privy Council clerk, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, and more. But the Justice Committee members would not hear from many of these witnesses because it's inconvenient to the government's narrative. They're very happy to allow what in many cases amounts to smears on the former Attorney General, and saying that perhaps she experienced it differently, and that if she didn't like what was happening, she should have resigned. But we heard from one of the witnesses that the parliamentary secretary referenced earlier, a former judge. And that judge said that the job of the Attorney General in that instance is to stay in place and to maintain the independence of our judicial system by not resigning and withstanding that pressure. Canadians are rightly concerned about what has happened, and Canadians continue their calls to hear from the former Attorney General. The question that's been asked is, what could they be afraid of her saying? If she's testified, and they say that if she's given a full account, that what more could she add? Well, Madam Speaker, we'd like to find out. She has said that the former Attorney General has said she has more to add, and we're calling on all members of this House to allow that gag order to be lifted and to let her speak. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
And I thank the member opposite for his contributions today and again for his contributions at the Justice Committee. Some statements have been made in the context of this afternoon's debate about the Justice Committee and the work that they're doing, in fact questioning the character of the members of the Justice Committee. And I think that actually doesn't do fairness or justice, if you'll pardon the pun, to the work that they've done on numerous pieces of legislation, on human trafficking, on access to justice, and now in terms of agreeing to study online hate. The question I have for the member opposite, who's a new member of that committee, is that if the gravamen of what transpired, going all the way back to that original Globe and Mail article, was the notion of pressure, inappropriate or otherwise, with respect to the issue of a prosecution of SNC-Lavalin, then what I put to the member opposite is that the only person who can intervene in a situation about an ongoing prosecution is the Attorney General of Canada. That's pursuant to Section 10 and Section 15 of the Director of Public Prosecutions Act. Once the former Attorney General became a former Attorney General and was moved to becoming a Minister of Veterans Affairs, she could no longer be pressured because she had no statutory role to fulfill. Therefore, what would be the purpose of waiving social client privilege in respect of things that related to her time as Minister of Veterans Affairs or as a member for Vancouver-Granville?
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thanks to the Parliamentary Secretary for his question. And that's very much the issue at hand, is we know that the Attorney General is the only one who can grant a deferred prosecution agreement, and this whole conversation about the Shawcross Doctrine, which the judge who appeared before us described as a flimsy argument or legal grounds for them to engage in this. But what we know is that she was fired for not doing what they asked, and that's why she was the former Attorney General. The conversations following her firing, following that cabinet shuffle, are germane to this issue. They relate directly to the core of what has happened here. She wouldn't do what the Prime Minister said, and so he fired her. He fired an accomplished minister and former Crown prosecutor and parliamentarian because she wouldn't do his bidding.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Victoria.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to congratulate my colleague on the Justice Committee, the member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes. I heard the member opposite talk about the Justice Committee and allegations that the character of the members of that committee was being maligned in this place. I was very fortunate to work in a committee that got along very well and produced unanimous reports, and then all of a sudden this hot potato was dropped in that committee, and it occurred to me that things looked very different, and it occurred to me that things were being directed from elsewhere. So I'd like, through you, Madam Speaker, to ask the member, as a new member who got to observe for the first time how that committee was functioning, whether he felt that they were acting as independently as the Prime Minister has told this House they act.
For Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for his question. I've had a brief opportunity to work with him on the Justice Committee, and when I joined the Justice Committee, I was told about the great bipartisanship that occurred and the good work that they've done, and there was a real juxtaposition between what's happened there and hearing from my colleague and hearing from who is the vice chair of the committee and hearing from the Conservative vice chair as well, that what has transpired since this issue came before the Justice Committee is a great departure from what they've known and the atmosphere and the character of those other members. So this isn't about their character, and it isn't about what usually happens. It's a marked departure from that, and it very clearly is the effects of PMO interference in the independence of that committee.